everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Palace, and this week's show is on conversion therapy. We're going to learn the when, whys, wheres, all of that good stuff. And we've got an amazing panel to do this. Hi, David. How are you? Welcome. Glad to see you here. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. If you are watching on Facebook, be sure to activate with StreamYard so I know who is talking, and so when you ask questions and make comments, and of course, unless you want to remain invisible, please know that this is a safe space. Please keep all comments and questions to the topic at hand and be respectful. I want to give a shout out to our top sponsors for the show. I want to thank Ruth, Ray, Michelle, Kirsten, Heidi. You guys rock. Thank you so much for your continued support. But most of all, thank you for watching and bringing us into your living room tonight and spending the next hour learning about some cool shit. Next week's show is actually going to be a Wild Goose recap. Today's been kind of nuts. We had the hearings today, and then I leave at 5 a.m., but I definitely wanted to put this show on because this is a really important topic to have. If you would like to support the show, you can go to sherrypalace.com or Cafe Press, all that stuff. We have, where's my screen? Ooh. Oh, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing here. These are all my shirts, and you open those and there's all kinds of designs in there, but you can support the show by going and purchasing stuff at the Cafe Press. I'm wearing the Love is My Religion, Peace is My Intention shirt tonight, apropos, but just going there and doing some shopping. It's everything from bumper stickers to sheets. It's kind of crazy, but you can go on there and help support that way. Or you can become a member and join in our VIP conversation after the show, where you can come on and speak to the panel. Okay, enough of the housekeeping. Let's get to business. Let's remove this. Our first guest is Michael Bussee. In 1974, Michael Bussee started a support group at his church for gay men who believed that God could change them from gay to straight. In 1976, he hosted the first conference for similar ministries from across the USA, where Exodus International was formed. He left in 1979 and has since been an outspoken critic of conversion therapy, resulting in the closure of Exodus. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to chat.
I've been looking forward to it.
Next, we have Bill Prickett. Bill grew up in the Bible Belt. He served nearly 20 years in the ministry, then built a successful career in public relations and communications. He's written 5 novels about the influence of conservative religion in Southern culture and the challenges of living authentically. Welcome, Bill.
Hello, good evening.
Thank you guys so much for being here. So let's start off with the basics. I gave the rundown about who you guys are. Michael, what exactly is conversion therapy? When did it start? Let's just start there.
Well, conversion therapy is a relatively recent term for any kind of effort to try to change a person's basic sexual orientation from gay to straight, or to change their gender identity. Conversion therapy, before it was called that, has a long history. It goes back to years and years and years, back to psychological attempts to try to change it, aversion therapy, exorcisms, all sorts of crazy ideas that being gay or lesbian or LGBTQ meant that you had some sort of disorder or mental illness that needed to be cured and could be cured. So it's gone by a lot of different names over the years. One is SOCE, Sexual Orientation Change Efforts.
Oh, wow.
We called it ex-gay counseling. That was a term that was coined probably in the early 1970s. I don't remember hearing it before that. Now it's generally referred to as conversion therapy, but it's based on this idea that if you are gay, something traumatic must have happened to you, or that you have some sort of psychological disorder or some other kind of issue that thwarted your natural, innate heterosexuality. It's based on the idea that there's really only one true sexual orientation, and that's heterosexuality. In fact, a lot of these programs don't even use the term sexual orientation. They reject that idea. They believe that everybody basically is intrinsically, basically heterosexual by nature, and that if you turn out any other way, it must mean that you were either abused as a child or traumatized in some way. Very often it's blamed on the parents, that you had smothering or ineffective or absent parents. So the parents get a lot of the blame for it, but it's based on the idea that with the right kind of approach, secular or religion or a combination of the two, you can eventually over time lose your same-sex attractions and your normal, natural heterosexuality will emerge.
Wow.
Yes.
So the term pray away the gay is actually kind of like heal away the gay. You can heal the trauma, then you can heal the gay is the concept.
Yeah, Bill, as a pastor, can identify, talk about that some more, that idea of spiritual healing.
Yeah. I was, and it's so funny because as I look at my background, I was everything stereotypical that people will say this causes a person to be gay. I had a very smothering mother. I had an abusive father. I had the trauma of childhood. And so I would be the person they'd point to and say, well, that's why you're gay. But I've known there was something different about me since I was probably 6 or 7 years old. And but I was in the ministry for about 20 years. And so the concept of pray away the gay is, obviously it's simplistic. It's overly simplistic.
Of course.
But it is the idea that through some kind of spiritual discipline, through prayer, through Bible study, through spiritual support, through memorization, then we can change these desires, because the desires are sinful. And so we can overcome them, we can change them, and then we can be God's best, which is heterosexuality.
It absolutely drives me bonkers. It's like saying that people of color were marked by Cain's curse.
Yes.
And all of those types of things. So to associate someone in the way that they were born to a sin has been done for the millennia. That doesn't make it any less disgusting.
Right.
And I always say that I am proof that sexuality is not a choice, because after all of my trauma from men, I'm still straight. Against all of my better judgment, I'm still only attracted to men. So, you can't tell me that there is some type of choice in this, because if I had a choice, things might be different.
Exactly.
But they're not. And you guys you guys were called the grandfathers of the ex-gay movement. You really were there at the founding of this. What type of techniques were used? What type of things were said?
I think I can speak to the very beginnings of what we call the modern ex-gay movement or conversion therapy movement. It was actually in some ways a response to the gay pride movement of the late 1960s. I did not grow up in a conservative church like Bill, and I did not have abusive or inadequate parents in any way, but I did grow up at a time when it was considered both a sin, a sickness, and a crime, by the way, to be gay. And in 1969, with the Stonewall riots, and there had been gay activism before this, but in a very visible way in 1969, the gay community decided to throw all of that nonsense off and say there's nothing wrong with us, and the problem isn't us. The problem is the homophobia. The problem is the social and religious prejudice against us. So they proclaimed gay pride. Well, that kind of left devoutly religious gay people in an odd spot, because we weren't ready to accept the idea that it was perfectly fine, both psychologically, socially, and biblically, to be gay. Then in 1973, 1974, the American Psychiatric Association decides to remove homosexuality from the DSM, from the listing of psychological disorders. And we thought, goodness, if we're not mentally ill, what are we?
Wait a minute. What year was that?
I think that was 1974, if I remember. The DSM-4, DSM-3 came out, and suddenly it wasn't a mental illness anymore. But those of us who had grown up being taught that it was, and I, like Bill, I recognized my gay feelings. I didn't have a word for them, but I recognized that I was attracted to the same sex, maybe at age 6 or 7.
Yes.
And I grew up at a time where if you gave any inclination, if any hint that you were quote unquote different, you were going to be subject to bullying and rejection. And I went through a lot of bullying in elementary and junior high school, vicious bullying and physical and name calling. Then along comes the Jesus movement. Also about that same time, that this surge of interest, especially among young people, in Christianity. And it was kind of a hippie version of Christianity, really, because kids could grow their hair long and they could wear sandals to church, and it was all about love and peace and the love of Jesus. And I got swept up in that in high school and became part of the Jesus movement. But I couldn't tell anybody about my secret feelings or attractions, because I knew that my brothers and sisters in the Lord would assume that there was something deeply spiritually wrong with me. But I picked up that this was a time when they were really emphasizing that if you had enough faith in the Lord, you could be free of drug and alcohol abuse, you could be free of all sorts of problems, you could be delivered. And I thought, well, gee, if people can be delivered from addictions, maybe I can be delivered from this. And so I stayed quiet, but kept my eyes open to see if there was any answer in the church. And nobody was talking about it in the church. It was not allowed yet. So in my first year of college, I joined up with Melodyland Christian Center across the street from Disneyland, which was this great big evangelical church that believed in faith healings. And I started working as a volunteer on their hotline. And I noticed there was nothing for people who, like me. There were support groups for single parents. There were grief support groups, addiction support groups. And so I was kind of frustrated. And I went to the pastor and I said, how come there are no groups for people like me? And he looked at me and he said, maybe God is calling you to do it. And I thought, what? But because it came out of his mouth, a man that I respected, I thought, well, maybe he is. And the pastor said, we'll give you a room and you can meet there on Tuesday nights. You don't have to tell anybody. If you know other people in the church that are struggling, why don't you form a Bible study? So we really started very, very small like that. And I think his ministry started probably about that same time. We didn't know about other ministries. We just started these little support groups that were kind of like AA. Not involved in politics, not involved in money. We were all volunteers. We were just there to give support and to pray for other people like us. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When did you get involved?
In theory.
So
I'm sorry?
It comes from those early years of the Jesus movement and a reaction to the gay pride movement. Really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, it sounds like, let's all come together and share love and all of that. It doesn't stay that way, though, right?
No. Well, for most of us, and Michael will tell you, we had never had anybody to talk to about this. Yeah. So just being able to come together with other people and say, I'm struggling this way. It started out just as other people to talk to. And it really was just a support group, a sharing group. Our group, the group that I led, was I think it was in the early 80s when we started. Um, so there was more going on at the time. Exodus was strong. Exodus was large by then. So, but when we got started, there was support not just within our group, but there was support for our group with other groups across the country. So, but we started off as we sat around in a circle. We talked about our lives, our feelings, how our week went, what we learned. I mean, it was just talking to one another.
And it was a wonderful relief. I remember before Exodus even started, I got involved in 1974 and left in 1979. So I was only involved for 5 years. But it was that wonderful relief from loneliness and isolation and shame that you could finally meet other people like yourself, other Christians like yourself, and say, this is what's really going on with me, and this is what I'm really feeling. These are my fears, these are my struggles. And they would they were kind. We were kind to each other. We were supportive of each other. Almost entirely men, men from conservative Christian backgrounds. Very few women came by, but maybe 12, 15 people every Tuesday night would gather together and just have a chat and pray for each other and confess our sins to each other. And but it took some. Then we found out about other groups like Bill's. And these groups started linking up, and we decided, if there are other groups like ours, maybe we should form an organization. That was my idea. I'm sorry. I thought maybe we should get together and have a conference. I'm one of those people like, let's get together and put on a show. Let's get together and have a conference. So we met at Melodyland, about 60 people, and in 1976, September of 76, and we formed this we called it a loose coalition. We weren't an organization. We had no paid staff, no political agenda. We were just sort of a network. And if I got a call from somebody in Texas, I could refer them to somebody like Bill. Or if we got a call from somebody in New York, we had a group there. But it grew and it grew and it grew. We had no idea that there were so many people like us that were struggling. And we took this surge of interest, as a sign from God.
Of course.
That we were doing what God had called us to do. So our intentions initially were...
I struggle with you guys that you keep saying that so many people were struggling with this. I mean, I've done a few LGBTQ shows, and one of the overwhelming things is, we are all trying to be authentic. And we are all struggling with authenticity. But when someone tells you that God doesn't love you because of your authenticity, because of who you are, that creates shame, and that creates that struggle that you guys record. Yeah. I mean, it's beyond self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like a complete shame game, as opposed to saying, hey, God would love you too. Yeah. It's how are we struggling to be ourselves just to make God love us?
Yeah, right. We lived in a theology that told us that this was sinful. And it was beyond, in many of our circles, it was beyond just a sin. It was the worst sin. It is an abomination. It separates you from God. God hates you. God turns his back on you, according to Romans 1. You will never enter the kingdom of heaven, according to 1 Corinthians. So there's all of these, and it does that puts that shame on you. So you struggle because you're told this is what's true about you, and so you
don't hear anybody exactly. And you don't hear anybody saying, it's perfectly okay to be gay and Christian. God doesn't have a problem with that. What he cares about.
As a woman, reverend, and doctor, I feel you.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to have a voice either.
What God, whatever you want to call it, cares about is how you treat other people, not not your sexual orientation. But we
Exactly.
didn't. I never heard anybody say that.
No. And I was in I was not, I didn't come up in a conservative. We didn't go to church at all until I was older myself. But then I got involved in an extreme fundamentalist group. I mean, extreme. And so I learned very quickly after coming into the Christian faith that my sexual orientation was completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so that's what drove me to want to try something that would change. I mean, I had spent most of my childhood with a father who constantly berated me for any kind of mannerisms, inflections, anything that he saw as effeminate. And so he literally was my first bully. He, the name calling, the shame, putting down. So I learned from a very early age to edit myself. I edited the way that I talked, the way that I walked. And so passing became a thing before I knew anything about it. So when I came into the Christian faith and I was told that this was unacceptable, but I was also told that God could heal this, that God could fix this, that it was just like any other sin. And about that same time in our community, Anita Bryant was really at the height of her career, at the height of her madness. And her organization held a workshop in my hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. And I went to it. And that's the first I'd ever heard about ex-gays. And that's where I learned about Exodus. They had some brochures and pamphlets there. And I picked up one and I wrote to somebody in Exodus and started correspondence, went to an Exodus conference, and then started our little group. Not intentionally. I just went back and told a few people what I was going through. People began to come to me and say, well, I have this too. I feel this. And that's how we started meeting. I said, well, let's just get together and talk about it. Then me being like Michael said, like saying, let's put on a play. Mine was, well, let's develop some curriculum. And so I started writing curriculum for our group and teaching things from the scriptures. And it got around the city what I was doing. And so the next thing I know, I'm being called by other pastors saying, well, I've got this kid in my church, or I've got this minister of music in my church. And then I had I had a couple of nationally known evangelists start calling me, and I was invited to speak to conferences. So it kind of
snowballed,
and without any kind of me trying to do it. There was just nothing going on and nothing happening, and this was the answer to it. Nobody was doing anything, and so I was kind of the person.
Right.
And so I would get phone calls from people in the middle of the night. I'd get a phone call from, if I'd name dropped right now, a nationally known evangelist saying, one of my board members has just been caught with a man. What do I need to do? So that's how it happened with us. And it snowballed. And so all of a sudden I'm on TV and I'm talking about it. And all this time inside, I'm thinking, I still have these feelings. I'm still attracted to men,
not women.
No, and by now I'm married, and so I had all this. The conflict didn't go away. It was just a different kind of conflict. Now I feel like
married to a man or a woman.
I'm sorry.
Married to a man or a woman?
I was married to a woman for 19 years.
Me too, and I it wasn't really the stated goal, but you always got a lot of encouragement if you started to date a woman or show interest in a woman. That say, see, God is leading you, Mike.
Yeah.
And I loved this girl that I knew in high school, and she was my best friend. And people said, well, that maybe that's the one that God has in mind for you. And I ended up telling her about my struggles, and she believed, like I did, that if she had enough faith and I had enough faith, God would reward that, and that I would become And I was a pretty good husband, except for the fact that I was gay, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But the conflict, the internal conflict of being sort of held up as an expert on this while you're still struggling inside, that became unbearable after a while.
Yes, it did.
And you realize
I began to unravel. I
Mhm.
just emotionally, and I was pastoring a church at the time, a church that was growing exponentially. I mean, we were a huge church, and I had all the responsibilities of church. I was leading this, what started out as a little support group was now growing. I was invited to speak at, all over the country, and I was literally burning out.
Yep.
Well, you guys were teaching how to be inauthentic and cover who you were, right? I mean, isn't that the essence of it?
Yeah, it was. But there was kind of a theological
loophole
for this. It was based on what we call then the name it and claim it school of theology. And that's the idea that if you speak it, it will become a reality.
For that, yes.
Whatever you claim in God's name, it will happen. So we were actually encouraged, and we were encouraging other people. If you say that you have changed, if you believe in your heart that God can change you, just speaking it, saying it, will cause it to manifest. So if you want a new job, you just have to claim it by faith that you have the new job and it will appear. If you want a new car, you just lay hands on the Cadillac in the church parking lot and you'll get one.
Very familiar with it.
Yeah, they called it the name it and claim it. And so I call it schizophrenogenic now, but that idea that on one hand, we knew it wasn't changing, but on the other hand, we were told that if we kept saying that it was, God would bless that.
Yes.
And what I noticed in
make it is another phrase, is exactly the
same. Fake it till you make it. That was it too.
And what I realized is that not only was I having that internal conflict, but every single one of the people that was coming to my ministry was having the very same conflict.
But we didn't talk about that.
We couldn't really admit it to each other that it wasn't working.
Yeah.
We were sort of in it together, but I could see. I was going, by that time I was majoring in psychology at a local university, and I could see that members of my group were becoming depressed. They were becoming self-destructive. They were becoming very, very discouraged. Some were becoming suicidal. And I thought, this isn't working. In fact, this is harming people.
Yes.
About that same time, I noticed that Exodus was starting to flirt with right-wing politics, anti-gay politics, and they're starting to align themselves with big money. And I thought, this is not the right direction to go. Not only are we not changing people, we're becoming anti-gay. And I thought, I got to get out of here. I got to leave this behind, even though it means leaving my marriage, even though it means being rejected by my church. I can't do this anymore. So in 1979, I left and pretty much have been speaking out against these programs ever since. I was thinking last night, it's been 45 years since I've been speaking out against this for about 45 years now.
Hush, 79 wasn't 45 years ago. Don't say those types of things on this show.
Yeah. And I'm a little more dense. I think I was in it for 8 or 9 years. I tried. I was one of those people. If somebody told me, if you pour honey all over yourself and roll around in the leaves, you'll be cured, then damn it, I was out there rolling in the leaves. If they told, I tried it because I wanted to change. So for I think it was 9 years, I went through every iteration of the newest fad in ex-gay theology, the name it and claim it, the healing memories. We would regressed memories. Anything, I would try it because I just thought something has to work. I would hear these wonderful testimonies at Exodus conferences and everything, and I'm sitting there going, why is it working for them and it's not working for me?
That's the worst.
when
I
it
mean,
really wasn't working for
And
any
it,
of them either.
yes, and because I've met most of them since then, and it wasn't working for them either.
exactly. I mean, I'm not comparing these in as far as traumatic, but being a woman in the evangelical church, I was supposed to be submissive and silent too, and was taking classes to be submissive and silent, and that didn't work for me either.
Right.
The church wants to make you someone that they want you to be, as opposed to applauding God's creation.
Right.
Yes.
And in doing so, the irony, I think, is the name, right? So it's Exodus. It's supposed to be like you are escaping the gay
Bondage.
lifestyle.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
going through the waters and all of that, when in actuality it was truly an exodus out of the church, out of the religion, for causing so much trauma, for saying that you and everybody a part of the LGBTQ community is wrong or sinful or shameful. And whenever I get into this argument online, I say, look at the animals. If you indeed believe that God created everything, then there are gay animals. So it cannot be an abomination. It cannot be all of these things. Because if so, then God is sitting up there wherever he may be, really grossed out all the time, because these animals are freaky as fuck. So, I mean, it's just to make sure that we tell everybody how natural this is, maybe that will eliminate some of the shame, the condemnation, those types of things.
I agree. I have called this whole conversion therapy movement, it started in response to gay pride. This is the conversion therapy movement is the gay shame movement.
Yeah.
It's about shame. It's about reinforcing. And I don't think necessarily that religious faith causes it, but religious faith reinforces it, or conservative theology reinforces it. I already believed there was something wrong with me before I became a Christian. I'd learned that from society at large.
Mm-hmm.
But Christianity gave me this comfortable theological framework for it.
Same here.
And the promise of unconditional love, which, by the way, when you stop pretending and admit what's really going on inside you and what's really who you really are, you find out that unconditional love comes with all sorts of conditions. When I finally came out, I was pretty much 100% rejected by all of my Christian friends.
Mm-hmm.
Drives me crazy.
I got letters from other leaders in the movement describing in great detail how I was going to burn forever in hell.
Yes.
I lost all of my support group. I lost all of my friends. So I thought, well, where did that unconditional love go?
Yeah.
It's unconditional as long as you play the game.
Conservative, evangelical, conservative fundamentalism does not have a space for outside the norm. There's just no space for it. And so when you do that, then it's a very cause and effect type of mindset. You are gay because of something. And so there's this cause and effect. And so once you walk away from it, as I did, then anything that happens to you after that is cause and effect. Several years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, and people I hadn't heard from in years from my conservative Christian background wrote me letters telling me that I'm sick because I walked away from my faith. And I didn't walk away from my faith. I walked away from this mindset that I needed to be somebody else. So there is this conditional love to what's called unconditional love.
What a vindictive, petty asshole God they
God, yes. And I know so many people who were part of this movement who now have absolutely no faith whatsoever. Yeah. They're antagonistic, and I totally get it. I totally understand it, because it is trauma. Yes, it is. Well, I think that conversion therapy at its very core is religious abuse.
Yeah.
It's just an abuse of who it causes this shame. It puts guilt on somebody, condemnation. That's nothing but abuse.
And it's bullshit.
As an abuse survivor, I can tell you the feelings are the same, the effects are the same, the results are the same, the long-term results are there.
Yes.
I know people who for years live with the trauma of it. And you think, I mean, I lost a dear friend just a couple of years ago who had been out of this for probably a decade or more. And I didn't know that he was still struggling with this. And one day he just ended his life. So the trauma that it causes is beyond what most people. And Michael and I have been working with survivors of these groups for him for 40 years, me for 30 years. And we worked together for several years with a group of people who had come out of the ex-gay groups. We had a Facebook group of several hundred people who had come out, and the trauma that you hear and the abuse that you hear is just mind-numbing.
Yes.
My mom died in 2002, and she, previous to that, was part of a women's prayer group at her church in Texas. And I was going out to see her when she got the cancer to move her to where I was. And so I got to meet everybody. And there was this woman there that had been through the conversion therapy and was considered a success story. When my mom told me about her, I literally laughed. And this is, 20 years ago. And I'm like, Mom, that's not true. No. She is now straight. She's a woman of God. It is awesome. She is a success to show that it is just demons doing this to you.
Mm-hmm.
The last night my mom was in Texas before we moved to Atlanta, this woman professed her undying love for my mom. Wrote her a book, gave her all of these gifts, and my mom excommunicated with her instantly and said, and of course I'm going crazy going, you can't do this. Why are you, how could you be such a bigot? And she's like, ooh, gross. And I was like, I told you so. I told you. I told you. And I keep her, I don't want to name her, but I keep the woman's gifts that she gave my mom as a remembrance, because I saw this woman transform from hindered, covered in these prayer meetings that I had gone to with my mom. And then that night when she came and professed her love, she was out. And you could see the change in her demeanor. You could see the power in her to say, look, I'm going to profess my love, to you, to my mom, regardless if you accept it or not. What about this unconditional love? And my mom proved it wasn't.
Amazing.
Every time when I speak, I talk about conversion therapy does not work. I honestly am convinced you cannot change a person's sexual orientation. And every time I say that in a public forum, whether on my Facebook page, I'll get people who'll say, well, what about so-and-so? And they'll send me YouTube videos or they'll send me testimonies. And I'd gotten so many of them. I wrote an article that's on my webpage, on my website, called How to Listen to an Ex-Gay Testimony. And there are things you listen to when people talk about, I was once gay, but now I'm not. I'm an ex-gay. I'm a former homosexual. And so I have a list of about 8 things to look for or to listen for in that. And that's the thing is you have these success stories, but I've never seen one that didn't fit one of my criteria. I hate to sound arrogant, but it's like Michael and I talk about. We were saying the same things at the time. We're supposed to say that. We can't say, I'm trying not to be gay. I still have gay feelings. We say, God has changed me. I was once gay and now I'm not. That's what you say.
But we're not supposed to change anybody. I mean, we're really not.
No,
We're
I
supposed
don't
to
think so.
change ourselves. We're supposed to be the best person we can be. Again, I go back to they wanted me to be a quiet woman. Ain't gonna happen.
I get that. I get that.
I went to courses. I went to marital classes to say, calm down, Sherry, lower your voice, do all this. Be a godly Psalm 31 woman. It ain't gonna happen. So, I mean, it is, that is the point of Jesus's the gospels is to love your neighbor anyway. We are not going to change them. The best that we can do is hope that they will not be an asshole.
Right.
It's the best that we can hope for. And when you use religion to try and change someone from who they were born to be, whether it be a loudmouth woman or a gay man, you're always going to fail, and it's going to create trauma. It's just it's complete insanity.
Right. One of the people sometimes ask me after all of this, where's your faith? Do you still consider yourself a Christian? And that's not an easy question, because that term Christian is so loaded with connotations and negative experiences. I had to do a lot of, I guess, what they call now unpacking. Mm-hmm. I called it sifting or sorting through. And I kind of pretended I was panning for gold. And when you're panning for gold, a lot of sand and gravel and mud gets washed away. And then finally you're left with this little shiny kernel of something beautiful. And I realized that almost everything that I learned in the church sifted away. I had to let go of it to be whole. I had to let go of it to find peace, and hold on to those little things that were gold. And about the only thing that I can hold on to now is the golden rule, that what matters most is how you treat other people. The kind of love or kindness or generosity or forgiveness that you extend to others, and also to yourself. I mean, it says, love others as you love yourself. We're supposed to love ourselves too.
Yeah. And when they say that some guy in the sky doesn't love you because of who you are, it's almost impossible to love yourself when you're being told all of those things.
No, and it's impossible to argue with that kind of platform, because the people who say that, and I was one of them, speak from a position of authority and black and white and definitive theology. And so there's no way you could say, well, that's just not true. You just have to let them be who they are so that you can be who you are. I've chosen, I didn't used to when I first began to come out and change the way I saw myself and change the way I saw God. I liked having the discussions, even the arguments, but I no longer do that anymore. I just am not, I don't have the time. I don't have the energy, the bandwidth. It's just not going to work. There's no reason. I still have people who come to me regularly and say, well, I've got a word from God for you. And I'm going, no, I don't think so. And so,
run the other way now.
Yeah. Thank you, but no.
Yeah.
Thank you, but no.
Yeah, I don't use the term Christian for myself these days. I refer to myself as a person of faith. We belong to a church, but I'm like Michael. The term Christian carries too much connotation to it. And so I don't want to spend my time saying, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm not like this. Yeah. I'm a Christian, but I don't do that. So I just simply say, well, I'm a person of faith. I think God loves me. I think God loves you. Beyond that, I don't know.
Yeah. There's something freeing about being okay with uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Totally.
In fundamental Christianity, everything had to be certain. It had to be yes or no. And to just go, I really don't know.
Yeah.
And it's okay that I don't know.
Yeah. When I was in fundamentalism, it was all about the answers. And now I realized I didn't even know all the questions. So
I love that.
It's just now that, and that's okay.
Right.
So what having been there, done that, being the grandfathers of this movement, what advice can you give to the younger generations that are still incurring this trauma, who are going to the counseling sessions, who are still reaping this shame show out there and still trying to make themselves someone that they're not?
That's a tough one. One thing that I'm proud that Bill and I have been able to do is some time ago we put out a call for other leaders who have left the conversion therapy movement to speak out and to tell the truth. Initially, it was just a handful of us, Bill, me, a few others, but now at least 25. Bill wrote a statement, a joint statement of former leaders condemning conversion therapy, pointing out the harm that it does, sharing our stories, and 25 former leaders signed that statement. Many of them people that were very high up in Exodus, including their officers and former leaders. And I think that has power. Now when people say, well, what about the success stories? I'll say, let me have you read something that's been signed by 25 former leaders who used to consider themselves success stories.
And the 25 and of those leaders together, I think we had like 100 years of experience in ex-gay and conversion therapy leadership. So it's not like we're just talking out of our ass. We knew, we had been there and done that. We were the movement, and so we would say, no, it's not going to work.
And beyond that, something that I found is even more powerful is for these people to hear survivor stories.
Yes.
That it's one thing for former leaders to say it didn't work for me. People can go, wow, that's sour grapes. You guys didn't try hard enough or whatever. But to really listen to the stories of people who've been through it personally, not as leaders, but as participants, and to hear them share their stories and what they went through and how they found peace with themselves. I think those stories are what eventually shut down Exodus. Exodus no longer exists as an organization. It closed in 2013, I believe. But there are other groups that are still out there trying to keep that work going. But it was the voices of survivors that basically forced Exodus to close its doors. And even the president of Exodus at the time came out publicly and said, it does not change people's orientations. And that, listen to that and listen to the voices of survivors. And beyond just listening to the stories, find yourself some support. Find a good gay-affirming therapist. Many people who seek out these programs do have serious psychological problems. They have lived through abuse, like Bill shared. They have maybe an addiction problem or underlying depression or some other psychological problem. But being gay isn't the problem. And they deserve to get help, professional help and support from qualified therapists. So I asked them, have you ever met a gay Christian, an openly gay Christian? And a lot of them haven't. But just being able to speak to somebody who is, like Bill, still a person of faith, who has found peace with themselves, that's powerful.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is in addition to what Michael says about finding a therapist that you can talk to, not one that's going to try to change you, but one that will let you be you. But in addition, if you are coming, because conversion therapy would not exist without conservative Christianity. The two are just linked together. So the people who are seeking out conversion therapy come out of an evangelical or fundamental background of some sort. Most of the time it's from their pastor is pushing them or their parents are pushing them to go and do this. But they need to know that there are other avenues out there. And so the Bible is being used to beat them over the head. But there are books out there they can read. There are websites they can read that shows them a different way to look at the Bible. in these passages that are used against them. And so seek out those kinds of resources. There's some wonderful resources out there, written from a conservative Christian perspective. Now, that's not my perspective these days, but some people like knowing that there are conservative gay Christians out there who've written materials, and they give their testimony, and that would give somebody something to hold on to, so that they're not just having the Bible used as a weapon against them.
Very, very smart.
If trauma caused homosexuality, I would be the biggest lesbian on the planet. Truth, right there. Seriously.
Really.
Well, it's so weird. I mean, I remember sitting in a conference one time I think it was an Exodus conference, because for some of these people, this trauma that we had in our past causes just the weirdest stuff. And I remember listening to this teacher talking about having an abusive father and a smothering mother, and he listed that it causes homosexuality, anorexia, went on and on and on. And I remember saying to him afterwards, I said, "So I could have been skinny and not gay?" It's like, what happened there? So, I mean, it's just so the cause and effect need of that kind of mentality. I mean, you see it in the Hebrew scriptures. It rains, and so God favors us. When it doesn't rain, we have to sacrifice. And yet we haven't gotten over that to this day. If you get sick, what did you do? Why is God trying to get your attention? Is God punishing you? If we could get away from this cause and effect mentality.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, then we couldn't be judgmental fucks, could we?
Well, it's the very basis of the judgmentalism.
Right? If we have to be nice and kind, that's just too hard for so many people.
Oh, it really is. Yeah.
Okay, well, we are almost at the top of the hour. Is there anything that you guys want to cover that we haven't?
Michael?
Trying to think.
Well, while you guys think, let me let the audience know. On August 9th, we are having a Survivors of Conversion Therapy show.
Good, yes.
We'll have 3 of the survivors on, so be sure to look out for that show too. We wanted to do this one first, so to give you a rundown on what conversion therapy is, and then in 3 weeks, we'll have the Survivor show.
That's great. They really deserve their voice. The courage that it takes for a survivor to step forward and say, "This happened to me, and I can speak firsthand about the pain that it caused me." It's re-traumatizing for many of them to have to tell the story.
Oh, totally.
So it takes a tremendous amount of courage for them to step forward and say, "This happened to me." Mm-hmm. And the emotions, like Bill said, years later can still be quite raw. So there's some vulnerability. There are some good documentaries that have been done about this subject that people, I would recommend that they watch. There was one called Pray Away that's available on Netflix, where 5 former leaders denounce conversion therapy, and one is still trying. But that's very powerful. Maddening. It's very powerful documentary, but it's also very triggering. So I want to warn people, if you watch it, you may need to watch it in segments and turn it off and yell at the TV and then turn it back on.
Listen, I cried through. I've been out of the movement since the 80s, and my husband will tell you, we watched it and I'd have to pause it, and I cried, and then I'd watch it again. I cried. It's an important documentary. It's on Netflix, but it triggered so much of, because I was involved in. I was trying to be ex-gay more than I was trying to be a leader. I wanted to heal myself, and being a leader just kind of accidentally happened.
Right.
So I understand the survivor trauma.
Yeah, it was traumatizing for me to watch, especially someone who is trying to make the world a more unconditional loving place. I was enraged. I was truly enraged for days.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just like, oh wow, that was heavy. I mean, it was. I reached out a lot to my LGBTQ friends and said, "Have you seen this? Are you okay? Can I talk to you about this? I need some support after this." To see the trauma, to see it laid out in what, and categorically laid out in the fame and the fortune and the rallies, and all in the name of shame under God, was just, it was a lot. It was
Well,
a lot.
Michael was in the documentary, and then we formed a Facebook group for people who had seen it and then wanted to talk about it.
Yeah,
So we
I
were
joined
moderator.
because of
We were
that. Yeah.
moderators. Oh, did you? Okay. Um, and people just had that same kind of response to it.
Yeah, and I think that your guys' voice means a lot. I think that, excuse me, you've been out of it a long time, but excuse me, I know that you're still being held accountable for things that happened in all of those. So I appreciate your work and your own vulnerability and putting yourselves out there, because it can be traumatizing back also, I'm sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and we know that people have been hurt by ex-gay ministries. We know that as leaders, we have a responsibility to own that people were hurt. Um, that's just the bottom line. I mean, I don't think I know for my I didn't intentionally go into this because I'm going to hurt all these people. I'm going to lie to them. I'm going to tell them that God hates them. I didn't go into it with that, but I know that people were hurt as a result of what I did, uh, unknowingly, but they were hurt. And I've had them come to me and just unleash how much they were hurt and how traumatized they were.
And I think
And
it's
I just have
important for them to be able to.
exactly. And so I just say, I know that I've apologized. I've issued an apology. I've written an apology. Uh, Anything that I can do uh, to move forward from that. There's no way I can make up for that. I can't give them back the years that they wasted trying to be straight because I told them they're supposed to be straight. And I have to own that.
Well, there are no errors or mistakes if you learn from them. And only the true evil would set out to hurt people. So you guys made mistakes and errors, but you made those with your own lives also. And that's where forgiveness comes in. But I'm sure that a lot of that has to be on your own and forgiving yourself for even falling for it too.
Right.
Yes, yes.
Exactly.
There's a lot of healing that needs to be done all the way around.
Exactly.
I truly am honored and appreciate your vulnerability in tonight's show. I don't even want to wrap it up. I want to continue talking.
I know the feeling. But thank you.
Well, I just have to. I have to. For me, I just want to say real quickly when I finally walked away from when I realized this is not working, and I resigned the ministry, I resigned my church, and not long after that, I began hearing about Michael. So I'm very grateful that I didn't have to do it alone. I learned about Michael not long after he had paved the way for people like me who came later. And so I'm very grateful. He and I have been friends now for many, many years. But when I first came out of trying to do that, I began hearing about him, and we reached out and connected.
Thank you, Bill. You were so sweet.
Well, and I'm honored to know you both, and I hope that someday I will too call you guys friends.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Michael, any final words, and where can people find you?
I don't have a website. There is a Facebook book called Pray Away Discussion, and it's for folks who have maybe seen the film. People can just look me up on Facebook. Nowadays I'm mainly about local history because I'm retired from all of this, and I'm now doing what I love, which is to just teach about local history, California history. And I have just a fun Facebook page that way, but people can feel free to message me privately if they need to on Facebook to reach out.
I also want to say that they sent me the 25 signatures and that statement. I will post that on YouTube as well as the Facebook group, so you guys can check that out too. And anything else that they sent me that I just haven't had a chance to post up there.
I can send you a resource list of agencies and organizations like the ones.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's great. I'll share it on YouTube as well as Facebook, and we'll get it out there.
Okay.
Bill.
Yes.
Final words, and this is your website.
Oh, yes, that's my website. You can find me there. You can connect with me on Facebook from there. You can go to my Amazon page. I've written 5 novels about my life growing up in the South. Not my life, but drawn from my life growing up in the South, which is an intensely religious culture, and trying to live authentically in that kind of oppressive culture. So I have 5 novels, and people are free to reach out to me in any of those venues there. And
Fantastic.
I'm like Michael, I've stepped away from a lot of this lately. I'm also healing physically, and so I don't do as much of the speaking, but on my Facebook page I speak out about it still a good bit.
Well, thank you so much for doing so. Again, thank you so much for taking this hour and being with me and sharing this conversation. I appreciate you more than you know. I'm going to send you backstage, and I will talk to you guys in just a second.
You bet.
Oh, I love tackling tough topics. I love trying to change the world with every show. It builds me up, and I'm going to need it because I leave for Wild Goose at 5 a.m. It's been kind of crazy around here, but I am speaking at Wild Goose on Friday and Saturday, so hopefully I will see a lot of you there. No matter what you do, you know what I'm going to say. Let me just get my act together first. No matter what, I will see you next week for a Wild Goose recap, but spend the week walking in love. See you soon.